The first time I heard them laugh, I was standing right outside my own cafe, the sign still fresh with paint, the windows spotless, and my heart trembling like a leaf in the wind. I hadn't even unlocked the doors yet when their voices carried across the street, light and cruel. "Bless her heart," one of them said. "She really thinks people will eat here?" Another chimed in. "That little place, it'll be gone in a month." They laughed like my dream was a punchline. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Ruth Anderson, and this is the story of how I turned that laughter into a legacy. But before I go any further, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? I always love hearing where folks tune in from, because no matter where we are, we all know what it feels like to be underestimated. Now, let me take you back to that year, the spring after my husband passed away. I was 52, a widow and holding on to little more than his old recipe book and a head full of doubt. We'd always dreamed of opening a cafe together, but life had other plans. He got sick, the medical bills came, and suddenly my world was built on silence and debt. When he passed, people expected me to fade quietly into the background. But grief can do strange things. For me, it planted a stubborn kind of hope, the kind that doesn't shout, just keeps whispering, "Try again." So I did. I sold our second car, cleared out the garage, and rented a little corner shop downtown. It had peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and a window that rattled every time a truck passed by. But to me, it was possibility. I named it the Bluebird Café after the bird that used to nest outside our kitchen window, the one my husband always said was a sign of better days coming. I told my sister about my plans one evening over tea. She smiled politely, but I could see the pity in her eyes. "Ruth, sweetheart," she said softly, "you should be thinking about slowing down, not starting over." Then came the others' neighbors, friends from church, even my old coworker from the bank. They all had the same look, that mix of concern and disbelief people give when they think you've lost your mind. And maybe I had a little, because those first few weeks were rough. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. to start baking, the smell of cinnamon rolls filling that tiny kitchen. I painted the chairs myself, brewed the coffee by hand, and waited for the sound of the bell above the door. But most days, the bell stayed silent. One afternoon, I overheard two women from my old job walk past. "Did you see Ruth's little cafe?" one said. "It's cute, like one of those hobbies widows pick up before they move in with their kids." The other laughed. "Yeah, bless her. She'll get bored and sell it before summer." I remember standing behind the counter, wiping the same spotless cup over and over just to stop my hands from shaking. The walls felt smaller that day, and for the first time, I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was chasing something I couldn't catch. But that night, as I sat alone with a cup of my own lukewarm coffee, I stared at my husband's old recipe notebook, his handwriting crooked and warm. On the last page, he'd scribbled something years ago. "If you ever open that cafe, Ruth, don't let anyone tell you you can't." I closed my eyes and felt the tears come. But behind them was something stronger resolve. The next morning, I walked into that cafe like I owned the world, even if no one else saw it. I turned on the lights, baked another batch of muffins, and whispered, "Let's prove them wrong." Little did I know the road ahead would test me in ways I never imagined, and those who laughed would one day walk through my doors, not to mock me, but to ask for a job. Mornings came early at the Bluebird Café. The streets would still be half asleep when I flipped the sign to open, the air outside smelling faintly of dew and diesel from the passing trucks. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon and brewed hope. I used to joke that if heartbreak had a scent, it would smell like freshly ground coffee, something bitter you learn to love because it keeps you alive. The chairs were always in neat little rows, 6 tables total, each polished until I could see my reflection in them, but they sat empty, day after day. I'd watch the sunlight crawl across the floorboards, listen to the clock tick, and wonder how long a dream could survive on faith alone. Some mornings I'd hum hymns under my breath to fill the silence. Other times, I'd talk to my husband's picture, the one I kept behind the register. "I did the peach pies today, Daniel," I'd whisper. "Just the way you like them. Maybe someone will order one." I told myself this was normal, that every dream starts slow, but the quiet hurt more than I expected. Bills started piling on the counter. The landlord began dropping hints about other tenants waiting. I smiled through every conversation, pretending business was fine, but inside I was terrified. No. Then one afternoon, something changed. An old man came in gray suit, gentle eyes, the kind that looked like they'd seen everything and stopped being surprised. He ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. When I placed it on his table, he took one bite, closed his eyes, and smiled. "You made this?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said softly. He nodded, then said, "Don't change a thing. You've got something special here, miss." He left a $20 bill for a $5 meal. That simple act, that tiny kindness carried me through weeks of doubt. The next morning, I made twice as many pies. I cleaned until the floorboards gleamed, and even though the cafe was still mostly empty, it didn't feel as lonely. Little by little, people started trickling in: a nurse from the nearby clinic, 2 college kids who studied by the window, and a trucker named Joe who called my coffee the only reason he survived the night shift. They became my regulars, my tiny mismatched family. I learned their stories, their routines, their favorite slices. The cafe began to hum softly with life again. But life has a cruel sense of timing. Just when the silence started to fade, a new sign went up across the street. The Oak Room Cafe grand opening. I'll never forget the sinking feeling in my stomach when I saw it. Fresh paint, fancy lettering, and glossy windows that reflected my small, worn-down shop like a ghost of what it couldn't be. And right there, in the window, smiling with a pair of golden scissors, were the same people who'd once mocked me. My old friend Lorna stood front and center, the same Lorna who had held my hand at Daniel's funeral, the same woman who once said she'd help me get my little place off the ground. She waved when she saw me watching from across the street, that polite, smug wave people give when they think they've already won. "Come see us sometime, Ruth," she called out. "We'll show you how the pros do it." I forced a smile and nodded, but inside something cracked. That night, I sat in my cafe long after closing, lights off, staring at their glowing sign through my window. It hurt not just the betrayal, but the way it made me doubt everything again. But as the hours passed, I noticed the moonlight spilling through the glass, glinting off the words, "Bluebird Cafe." And I remembered what bluebirds mean: freedom, hope, beginnings. So I made myself a promise right there in the dark. I wouldn't compete. I would endure. I poured myself another cup of coffee, straightened the chairs, and whispered into the still air. They can build their oak trees if they want, but this bluebird's still gonna sing. I thought I'd grown used to humiliation, but nothing prepared me for watching the Oak Room Cafe flourish right across from my own windows. Every morning, I'd see the street fill with cars and chatter as their customers poured in. Lorna's staff wore matching aprons, their windows shimmered with gold trim, and their music, jazzy, upbeat, confident, floated straight into my shop like a taunt. Meanwhile, I stood behind my counter, stirring a pot of soup that no one ordered. What cut deepest wasn't the competition, it was the betrayal. I remembered every late-night phone call with Lorna, back when I was planning the Bluebird. She'd asked about my recipes, my suppliers, even my decorator. She said she wanted to learn how a real friend supports a dream. And then she opened her own cafe using my ideas. Even the layout was familiar. My heart broke in silence that day, though I smiled for the few customers who still came by. One morning, I stepped outside to sweep my doorway. Across the street, I saw her standing with a group of people laughing, the same kind of laughter I'd heard that first day, but this time there was no mistaking the cruelty in it. She cupped her hands around her mouth and called out, "Don't work too hard, Ruth. You might get a crowd if you start giving the coffee away." Her friends roared. I turned back inside, cheeks burning. My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the broom, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that. I just locked the door and went to the back room, sat at the little metal table, and let the silence surround me. That night, I wrote in my journal, maybe this dream was too small for such a big world. I thought about closing, about selling the lease and walking away before the debt drowned me. But something inside refused to die quietly. A few days later, a stranger walked in, tall man, salt and pepper hair, camera slung around his neck. He looked tired but curious. "Is this place open?" he asked. "Always," I replied, forcing a smile. He sat by the window and ordered a slice of apple pie and coffee. Simple. I brought it to him, still warm. When he took his first bite, he closed his eyes and let out a sound, half sigh, half memory. "This," he said slowly, "tastes like Sunday mornings when my mother was still alive." He looked up at me then, eyes wet with nostalgia. "You made this yourself?" "Yes," I said softly. "Every recipe in here came from my kitchen." He pulled out a small notebook. "I'm a food writer," he said. "I travel around the state looking for stories like yours." I froze. "Stories like mine?" He smiled. "The ones people overlook until they can't anymore." I didn't think much of it then. He paid his bill, thanked me again, and promised to send me a copy of the article. I half expected he'd forget. But 2 weeks later, I walked into the cafe and nearly dropped my coffee pot. There was a line outside, an actual line, people waiting to come in. "Is this the place from the article?" one woman asked, clutching her phone. "The Bluebird Cafe? The one with the widow who still makes everything by hand?" I didn't even know the article had gone live, but there it was, the heart of Carolina, a widow's cafe that feeds the soul. It wasn't just a review. It was a story. My story. He'd written about my husband, my recipes, my resilience. That day, every table filled. The bell over the door never stopped ringing. I could hardly keep up with orders. By nightfall, I was exhausted, flour on my face, laughter in my lungs for the first time in months. As I locked up, I looked across the street. The Oak Room was still open, but empty. Lorna stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the line that stretched from my cafe. For once, it was quiet on her side. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not yet, but balance. The tides were turning, and for the first time in a long while, they were turning in my favor. The morning after the article went viral, I arrived at the Bluebird Cafe to find people already waiting outside, some holding newspapers, others clutching their phones with my photo on the screen. It didn't feel real. I stood there on the sidewalk, apron still wrinkled, hair pinned back, trying to steady my breath. A woman in her 50s smiled at me and said, "You're Ruth, aren't you? The one who bakes with love." For a second, I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and unlocked the door. The smell of cinnamon and brewed coffee wrapped around us like an old friend. By noon, every chair was full. By evening, I was out of pies, out of coffee beans, out of breath, but for once, not out of hope. I worked from dawn till dusk that week, my hands blistered but my heart alive. Word spread faster than I could keep up. People drove from nearby towns just to taste the story. Some brought flowers. Some just wanted to sit and talk. One woman said my cafe reminded her that kindness can still taste like something. I hired help, 2 local teens, Amy and Jacob. They reminded me of myself at that age, eager, awkward, full of dreams. "Miss Ruth," Amy said one morning as she wiped the counter, "people say the Oak Room's trying to copy your pies now." I looked up, surprised. "Is that right?" She nodded. "But folks say it's not the same. They say yours feel like home." That made me smile. Not because of pride, but because of what it meant I had finally built something real, something no one could imitate. By summer, I could barely keep up with the demand. Reporters called. Bloggers asked for interviews. A local TV crew even showed up one morning while I was rolling dough. They filmed me kneading pastry, laughing with customers, telling stories about my husband's recipes. When it aired, the phone rang non-stop for a week. Then came the letter. It was from a development company in Raleigh. They wanted to franchise the Bluebird Café. They'd seen the coverage and believed my authentic home-style concept could become the next big brand. I remember sitting at my little desk after closing, staring at that letter. My heart raced. 10 years ago, I was a widow with a handful of recipes and a trembling voice. Now someone wanted to buy what I built. But money wasn't what I wanted. I wanted purpose. So instead of selling out, I made a different deal, one that let me expand while staying true to myself. Within a year, there were 2 more Bluebird cafes, one in Asheville, one in Durham, both run by single mothers who had once come to me looking for work. Every time I walked into one of those cafes, I felt Daniel's presence, his recipes, his laughter, his quiet belief in me. One afternoon, I visited his grave and placed a slice of pie on the grass beside his headstone. "We did it, Daniel," I whispered. "We really did it." But as my light grew brighter, the shadows across the street deepened. Lorna's Café. The Oak Room started losing customers. Their prices went up. Their smiles went down. She'd fire staff, then rehire, desperate to stay afloat. One evening, as I was locking up, I saw her sitting alone inside, staring at an empty dining room. A strange mix of pity and peace washed over me. Once upon a time, I might have wished her failure, but now, I just wished her clarity, the same kind I found when everything was quiet and the world stopped believing in me. Still, the story wasn't done. Because success, I'd learned, brings its own kind of test, one that doesn't always come from your enemies, but from the mirror. And mine was just around the corner. Expansion changes everything. It doesn't just fill your pockets, it tests your heart. When I opened the second Bluebird Café, people called me an overnight success. I used to laugh quietly when I heard that. Overnight? Try 10 years of struggle, heartbreak, and humiliation before the first light broke through. The Asheville branch opened on a rainy Thursday morning. I stood near the window, watching people line up under umbrellas, and thought about the first day I opened my original shop, how I'd prayed for just one customer. Now there were dozens. Reporters wanted interviews. Local schools asked me to speak about women in business. It was surreal. But fame, even small-town fame, brings whispers. I began hearing things again, the kind of murmurs I hadn't heard since those cruel early days. "She's lucky," someone said. "She's milking the sympathy angle," another added, "and the cruelest one of all. She didn't build it, her husband's story did." It stung, but this time I didn't crumble. I'd learned something about words. They only have power when you let them echo inside you. I refused to give them that space anymore. Still, I kept my ears open, because in business you have to. One afternoon, my manager Jacob came into the office looking uneasy. "Miss Ruth," he said, "I think you should see this." He handed me a flyer, the Oak Room Café under New Management, Fresh Start, Familiar Faces. The new management. Lorna's niece. I read the tagline again and sighed. They were trying to relaunch the same brand that once laughed at mine. And yet, deep down, I wasn't angry anymore. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Ruth?" a shaky voice said. It's Lorna." For a second, I didn't know how to respond. She sounded smaller than I remembered, the sharpness gone, replaced by a tremble I recognized too well. "I heard you're expanding," she said softly. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. A pause. Then she sighed. "I was wondering if you're hiring." The words hung in the air like a ghost from the past. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Hiring. The woman who once called my cafe a hobby for widows was now asking me for a job. "Right." She kept talking, explaining that her cafe had gone under, that the new management wasn't working, that her husband left her when things got bad. I listened, saying little, Every sentence from her mouth felt like an echo of my own pain from years before only now the tables had turned. "I'm not looking for pity," she said at last. "I just need a chance, a steady job, maybe as a manager. I know the business." I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "I'll think about it," I said. "Come by next week. We'll talk." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, my thoughts caught between memory and mercy. That night, I called my sister. "You'll never believe who wants to work for me," I said, half laughing, half stunned. When I told her, she gasped. "Ruth, don't you dare hire that woman, after everything she did." I hesitated. "Maybe people can change," I murmured, "and maybe giving her a chance says more about me than it ever could about her." I didn't sleep much that night. Part of me still remembered the sting of her laughter, the weight of those early humiliations. But another part, the part that built the bluebird with trembling hands and relentless hope, whispered, "Grace doesn't make you weak. It makes you free." The next morning, I told Jacob to schedule an interview. "Who should I put it under?" he asked. "Just tell her to come in," I said. He nodded, and I watched him leave the office. My heart felt steady, strong and curious. Because soon, Lorna would walk through my doors again. But this time, she wouldn't see the woman she once pitied. This time, she'd meet the woman she underestimated. The morning of the interview, I arrived early before the sun fully rose. The air smelled like rain and roasted beans. My hands rested on the counter, tracing the grain of the old wood I'd sanded myself a decade ago. It felt poetic somehow that all the pain and all the patience had led me right back here, waiting for the woman who once told me I'd never make it. When the bell over the door finally chimed, I looked up. There she was, Lorna, the same sharp jaw but softer now, hair thinner, shoulders lower. Her clothes were neat but tired, like they'd been ironed with hope instead of heat. She hesitated near the doorway, scanning the place. The smell of pie and coffee filled the air, the chatter of customers humming softly. She looked around as if trying to make sense of it, as if she couldn't believe the cafe she once mocked had become this. "Ruth," she said quietly, walking up to the counter. "You look good." "So do you," I lied, with a kind smile. "You can take a seat. We'll talk in my office." Her eyes flickered in surprise. My office! I could almost see the calculation behind her expression, trying to place where I fit in the business now. We walked to the back room, the same room that once held boxes of unsold muffins and unpaid bills. Now it had framed reviews, awards, and photos of my team smiling in front of each bluebird branch. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was proof. She sat down, clasping her hands. "I really appreciate you seeing me," she said, voice trembling. "Things haven't been easy. After the Oak Room closed, I tried a few things, but—" She stopped, eyes wet. "You know how it goes?" I nodded slowly, letting her speak. There was a time when I would have relished this, watching her crumble, the same way I had once crumbled because of her. But sitting there, across from this fragile woman, I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance. Like the anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind something quieter understanding. "You were always good at this," she continued. "People like you. You've got a warmth I never could fake. I guess that's why you won." "I didn't win, Lorna," I said softly. "I just kept going." Silence. The kind that makes two people look everywhere except at each other. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I'm looking for any position manager, cashier, even baker's assistant. I can start right away." I folded my hands on the desk. "You've had experience managing a cafe, haven't you?" "Yes, but—" She stopped when she noticed something. Her gaze fell on the framed business certificate on the wall, the Bluebird Cafe Group owner, Ruth Anderson. Her face went pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "You own this place," she whispered, disbelief cracking her voice. I smiled, not smugly, not cruelly, just calmly. "Every one of them." Her eyes filled with tears. I I didn't know. I thought you just worked here." "I do," I said, rising to refill her coffee. "But I also built it, piece by piece, even when everyone said I couldn't." She looked down, cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry, Ruth, for what I said, for what I did." I sat back down and studied her face, the face that once looked at me with pity and superiority. Now it just looked human. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "but I can't hire you, not because of revenge, but because this chapter of your life and mine needs to close the way it began, separately." Her chin trembled. She nodded slowly. "I understand." She stood to leave, her footsteps echoing softly across the tile. At the door, she paused and turned back. "You really did make it," she whispered. "I didn't make it," I said with a small smile. "I became it." When she left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood by the window. Outside, the street buzzed with morning life customers laughing, bluebirds chirping somewhere in the distance. For the first time, I felt no anger, no need to prove anything, just peace. Deep, quiet, earned peace. The kind that comes when you realize your revenge isn't in their downfall, it's in your rise. That evening, after Lorna left, I stayed long after closing. The cafe was quiet, washed in the soft gold of the streetlight outside. I sat at one of the corner tables, the same one where I used to cry into my cold coffee all those years ago, and listen to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the echo of my own heartbeat. The walls smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, my favorite perfume in the world. I ran my hand along the edge of the table, remembering how I once sanded these corners myself, dreaming of a day when the chairs would be full. I had imagined laughter, conversation, and warmth, but never imagined this. Never imagined peace could feel so gentle after years of noise. I thought about Lorna, how broken she looked walking out that door. A part of me wished things had been different, that she'd stood beside me back then instead of across the street. But maybe we both became who we were meant to be because of what we did to each other. Maybe pain really does shape the hands that build something lasting. A soft knock on the door broke my thoughts. It was Amy, my young waitress, with her hair tied back and flour on her cheek. "You're still here, Miss Ruth?" I smiled. "Couldn't sleep." She chuckled. "We got another mention online tonight. Some blogger called the Bluebird the heart of the Carolinas. You should see the comments. People say they drive hours just to feel at home here." I laughed quietly. "Home," I repeated. "That's all I ever wanted this place to be." After she left, I made myself one last cup of coffee and stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars low, the street almost empty. Across the way, the old Oak Room building stood dark, its windows boarded. I didn't feel satisfaction, just stillness, like a story had finally ended the way it was supposed to. The next week, I was invited to speak at a small business women's conference in Raleigh. I almost said no. I never saw myself as a speaker. But Jacob insisted. "Your story gives people hope," he said. "You should share it." So I did. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of women, young, old, hopeful, tired, I felt something rise inside me. I told them everything. The laughter I overheard that first morning, the silence of my empty cafe, the article that changed everything, and the day the same people who mocked me came asking for work. I could see tears in their eyes. I could see recognition, that quiet fire we all carry when the world tells us no. And I told them this: when people underestimate you, don't argue, don't fight, just build. Let your work speak in the silence, because success, spoken gently, is louder than mockery shouted loud. The audience stood. I'll never forget that moment, not because they clapped for me, but because I saw myself in every single one of them, women who'd been told they couldn't. That night, when I got home, I unlocked the door to my cafe and just stood there in the dark. The moonlight poured through the window, brushing over the tables, the counter, the framed certificate on the wall. It smelled like cinnamon and courage. I whispered softly, "We did it, Daniel. You and me." As I turned off the lights and headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the glass, older, wiser, but glowing with something money couldn't buy. Freedom. Before I stepped outside, I looked back one last time and smiled. "If they ever tell you you're too old, too small, or too late," I said to the empty room, "just make them eat their words, slowly with pie." The bell jingled as the door shut behind me, and the aroma of peace lingered in the air, the kind that only comes when you've walked through fire and found yourself whole on the other side.